Hello, I'm Martin Warren. I'm a lecturer at the Royal School of Artillery based at Larkhill in Wiltshire. For the next 10 minutes I will be talking about fractions, which are still used a great deal in everyday speech and also in mathematics. So I'm going to describe what a fraction is, talk about equivalent fractions, reducing fractions to the lowest form, adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing with fractions, converting fractions to decimals, and then converting decimals to fractions. A fraction is one number over another number. The top number is called the numerator, the bottom number is called the denominator. And it can be any number for numerator and denominator apart from 0. You cannot have 0 for the denominator or the bottom number. If you want to see what happens when you enter into your calculator any number divided by 0, see what you get, see what happens. Okay, so a fraction consists of any non-zero number for the numerator and any non-zero number for the denominator. There are two types of fractions. There's what's known as a proper fraction. This is one where the numerator is divided by a non-zero denominator. For example, 1 over 4, 1/4, 1 over 2, 1/2, and 3 over 4, 3/4. You notice that the bottom part is larger than the top. 1 over 4, 1 over 2, etc., etc. And this is known as a proper fraction. An improper fraction is one where the numerator is greater than the denominator. For example, 7 over 3, 15 over 8, and 5 over 4. The fractions can be expressed as 2 1/3, 1 7/8, and 1 1/4 respectively. So even though they're an improper fraction, you can convert them to a whole number followed by a proper fraction. But in all these cases, we're dealing with non-zero numbers. Fractions. As I said earlier, fractions are used in everyday speech as much as in mathematics. Football match has 2 halves. Beer is still sold in pints and in half pints. We talk about time in units of half or quarter hours. If you've done any work with imperial units, plumbing fittings, nuts and bolts, etc., then you will have come across fractions as sizes before. For example, an Allen key or spanner could be 3/16 of an inch. A pipe could have a 1/2 inch diameter. In the metric system, decimals are more commonly used as they are based on multiples of 10, hence the name. Calculators have also reinforced the use of decimals because they work with units of 10 as well, though some calculators have a fraction button, often in the form of A/B/C. And as you can see from the slide, fractions lend themselves to sort of dividing things up quite nicely. The cake is divided into quarters with 1/4 slice missing, so you can count them, 3/4 remain. And then we have the various shapes along the bottom, coloured red, where a proportion of the object is missing, so we can talk about halves, 3/4, etc. Equivalent fractions is the same fraction expressed with different numbers but still retaining the same size. So any one fraction can be converted into another fraction as long as the numerator and denominator are changed by the same factor. So as long as the top and bottom change by the same factor, it is still the same fraction. For example, here we have a half, and we can multiply the top by 2 and the bottom by 2 and end up with 2 over 4. It is still equal to a half, though instead of being expressed in halves, it's now expressed in quarters. The reason for doing this is for adding and subtracting fractions, or when we multiply and divide by fractions, we sometimes want to reduce it from 2 over 4 into 1 over 2 or a half. Take this equivalent fraction here. We have 2 over 5. We multiply the top by 2 and the bottom by 2, we end up with 4/10. So 2/5 can be expressed as 4/10, as the top and bottom have both been multiplied by 2. Conversely, 4/10 can be expressed as 2/5 by dividing the top and bottom by 2. So in this case, 2 is a factor used to either multiply the top and bottom or divide the top and bottom. The general rule to do with fractions is that what you do to the top of a fraction, the numerator, you must do to the bottom of the fraction, the denominator. So if you multiply the top by 2, you must multiply the bottom by 2. If you divide the top by 3, you must divide the bottom by 3. If you didn't do this, you would change the magnitude of the fraction and end up with a different fraction. Lowest form. Fractions should always be expressed in the lowest form. This is the equivalent form when it's been reduced by taking out all common factors. Common factors are numbers that will divide both into the top and the bottom. When you can no longer divide a common factor into the top and the bottom, the fraction is in its lowest form. Common factors are numbers such as 2, 3, 5, and then you can get multiples of 2 and 3 and 5, etc., 10, 12, 16. And it gets harder and harder to do this mentally in your head as that's where calculators come in. But just remember the general rule, that what you do to the top of a fraction, you must do to the bottom. So if we have a look at an example, we've got a very easy example here of converting or reducing a fraction 10 over 40 into its lowest form. 10 and 40 divide by 2, 5, 10. 8 goes into 40, but we can't divide 10 by 40. The easiest thing to do here is just divide by 10 and just cross out the zeros. So 10 over 40 can be expressed as 1 times 10 over 4 times 10. Divide by the top and the bottom by 10 and you end up with 1 over 4. So 10 over 40 expressed in its lowest form is 1 over 4. We can't divide the top and the bottom by anything else that is common to them, so we stop and that's it. The reason you would do this is when you do any maths with fractions, multiplication, division, adding and subtracting, you very often end up with a fraction that isn't in its lowest form. And even though it doesn't change its value, 10 over 40 is still a quarter, 1 over 4, it's good practice to reduce it into its lowest form. It's much easier to work with and it's much more understandable. So let's have a look at some mathematical operations using fractions. We'll start with adding. We wish to add a half and a quarter together. And if you know fractions, you might know that a half plus a quarter is 3/4. But how did we arrive there? Well, we had to take the half and convert it to quarters. We cannot add fractions together if the denominators aren't equal, aren't the same value. So we had to convert the half into quarters. So a half is equivalent fraction. Multiply the top by 2 and the bottom by 2, we end up with 2 over 4. The denominator is now the same, and so we can add the 2 over 4 plus the 1 over 4 and end up with 2 plus 1 equals 3 over 4. So a half plus a quarter is equal to 3 over 4. Now it might be a case that we would have to reduce it to its lowest form, but that won't occur here because 3 over 4 is already in its lowest form. Subtracting fractions, again, is very similar. We've got 3/4 minus a quarter. Again, we've got to make sure that the denominator is the same for both fractions before we can do the adding or the subtraction. In this case, we're lucky with dealing with quarters. Both fractions are expressed in fourths. So we've got 3 over 4 minus 1 over 4. We can write that as 3 minus 1 over 4, which equals 2 over 4. Now, in this case, we will have to reduce this to the lowest form. 2 over 4, both the top and the bottom divide by 2, and we end up with 1 over 2, or a half. Multiplying fractions, this is more straightforward. When we multiply fractions together, we multiply the top numerator and we multiply the bottom, the denominators. So a half times a quarter, we multiply the tops, 1 times 1, and 2 times 4, we end up with 1/8. More complex fractions, 3 over 4 times 7 over 8, do exactly the same thing. Multiply the tops, 3 times 7, multiply the bottom, 4 times 8, and then look to see if whether we can reduce it any further by taking out common factors. In this case we can't, so we express it as 21 over 32, 21/32. Dividing fractions is very similar to multiplying fractions. All we do is we turn the second fraction, the one we're dividing by, upside down and multiply. So if we had a half divided by 1/4, we can write that as a half. Instead of divide, we use multiply. Instead of 1/4, we write it upside down, 4/1. So 1/2 times 4/1, that's equal to 4/2. We reduce that to its lowest form. 4/2 simply equals 2. So a half divided by a quarter equals 2. It is quite straightforward to convert a fraction to a decimal, particularly if you do have a calculator. You simply divide the top, the numerator, by the bottom, the denominator. So you take the top, divide by the bottom. Here we have an example. Convert 3/4, 3/4 to a decimal. 3 divided by 4 equals 0.75. So the decimal equivalent of 3/4 is 0.75. Bear in mind that not all fractions will convert to a nice round decimal. For example, 1/3, a third. If you enter that into your calculator, 1 divided by 3, you get 0.3333, and it just carries on recurring. It's the same number, same amount, but it's expressed to a number of decimal places. So where 1/3 is exact, 0.333, you're going to have to decide when you're going to stop writing down all those threes. And that depends on the precision you want. So maybe after 2, 3, depending on how many you need. Converting from a decimal to a fraction is slightly more involved. So we have to start off with a decimal, in this case 0.125, and we're required to convert that to a fraction. What we do, if you write the number or the decimal down, 125, write it over a 1 followed by a 0 for every decimal place. So we end up with 125 over 1000, 1000, 3 zeros for the 1, 2 and the 5. Now we could leave it there as 125 over 1000, but the rule is we always express fractions in the lowest form. So we're going to look for a common factor that divides both into 125 and 1000. Numbers ending in 5 always divide by 5. Numbers ending in 0 always divide by 10 or 2 times 5. So you could do it bit by bit. I just happen to know that in this case the largest common factor is 125 itself. So 125 over 1000 can be expressed as 1/8 or 1/8. Now the common fractions have names such as 1/8 or 0.5. It converts to 1/2 or a half. So half, a quarter, a third, 2/3, 1/8, 5/8, 7/8, etc. Very often get pronounced like that. And so you tend to remember what the equivalent decimals are. Okay, so in this presentation I've talked about fractions, what makes a fraction, a numerator over a denominator, both non-zero numbers, but particularly you cannot divide by 0, so the denominator, the bottom number, must always be non-zero. We looked at equivalent fractions, a fraction expressed by some factor, so it's increased or decreased by a factor, but it still represents the same size fraction. We reduced fractions to the lowest form by looking for common factors. We looked at some common mathematical operations such as adding, subtracting, multiplying and dividing with fractions. We converted fractions to decimals, and we converted decimals to fractions. All that remains now is for you to practice and learn and improve your mathematics skills by doing that practice.